So I was really looking forward to our conversation because we have talked briefly a little bit about each other in the beginning of last year. Well, I think it was like towards late last year.
Yeah, starting in August with the Coffee Roasters Guild retreat, right?
Yeah, that's where we met. And then I really enjoyed like the tidbits of stories that I did hear from you. And I was like, I wonder what... Okay. Because like it really threw me for a loop, like some of the stuff that you told me. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. Well, I really think that she'd have really cool like experiences and stories within the coffee world then. And I'm like, okay, let's see if she's interested in coming onto the show. So I reached out and you're here. And now I'm excited to hear about your story.
Good for you for getting Beans Without Boundaries taking off. That takes a lot of courage and dedication. Great job. But I think you're doing great. So I would say I started on my coffee path in 2007. And that was because I was shifting careers out of a corporate job. And that brought about some reflection on, what do I really want to do? And and at the same time, my husband's friend was sending emails from places like Guatemala and Tanzania saying how he was buying coffee from the women and paying them premiums to help them improve their livelihoods. I'm like, wait a minute, he's doing development. And that's what I always wanted to do, was like be in economic development in developing countries. Way back when I envisioned working for the United Nations or something like that. And so turns out this friend of my husband's is in coffee. He owns a coffee roasting company in Portland called Portland Roasting. His name is Mark Stell. And he was doing stuff like trying to start a coalition of coffee roasters who would track their progress on sustainability development goals. All the goals that the United Nations was trying to get companies to pay attention to. This was back in 2007. He was trying to get coffee companies to pay attention to those. All this to say, this friend of our family was kind of on the cutting edge of sustainability and gender and direct trade, like a lot of that stuff. He was really doing it already. And I was fascinated. And so I was like, well, how can I learn more about this? And he suggested I go to SCA, the SCA Expo. So I did. My first one was in 2007 in Anaheim. And I have to say, I was pretty hooked. I was like, oh my gosh, this is such an interesting industry. I have to figure this out. Between 2007 and 2009, I decided to start my coffee company, Artisan Coffee Imports. But for the first 5 years, we were focused on decaffeinated coffee.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that's because... it's kind of unique. The reason is because that's what I drink. I have always been a decaf coffee drinker, but I was concerned about why it didn't taste as good as the other coffees. And I learned by going to all these seminars at SCA that there wasn't actually a good reason other than the supply chain was not paying very much attention to the quality of decaf coffees. People were taking old beans, year-old beans, decaffeinating them, and even selling them in specialty coffee stores. And so I said, well, that sounds like a niche to me. And so the way I got started was I was basically curating decaffeinated coffees that other people had already imported to the U.S. I was not actually moving containers across oceans. But fast forwarding some more, I really wanted to get deeper knowledge on how to import coffee in a way that supports the populations in coffee producing countries. So I signed up for a master's degree at Michigan State University in community sustainability. And that enabled me a huge breakthrough opportunity to go live and work in Rwanda.
Wow.
Because my graduate school advisor, he had a huge history of working with farmers in Rwanda, in Burundi. And so he was tapped by USAID, a very large funder, to do another coffee project in Rwanda and Burundi. And I just happened to be lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time to be on his team of researchers.
Wow.
So I was only getting paid like $20 an hour as a graduate student researcher, but I was like, this is so cool.
Right, the
I'm
opportunity.
going to leave my day job. Yeah, I'm going to leave my day job and take my family to Rwanda for a year so that I can be like front and center on the ground on this project. And it was so exciting. I loved every minute of it. And that really helped me get to meet coffee farmers, lots of coffee cooperatives. I went to at least 16 while I lived there that year. And I basically, decided to start sourcing coffee, moving coffee in containers across the ocean, because I found some coffee there that I thought, this story is so exciting. Roasters in North America will love this. So that was 2016 that I was first started moving containers. So that means we are in our like 7th year now of moving coffee. So that's how things have evolved. I will say that how this is different than what I thought is when I was starting the master's degree, which is, as many of you and your audience will know, there were a lot of tuition bills that me and my family were looking at. And I'm like trying to rationalize, why am I paying all this money for all these tuition bills? And I was like, because I think if I can get this degree, I will be able to get a job as a sustainability officer at a coffee company. Like, I think I just don't have enough, academic credentials as someone who knows the current stuff on sustainability for like a coffee roasting company to tap Ruth Ann as hey, you'd be great for a sustainability officer for our roasting company. So I thought I was going to get the credential that I needed to land like a coffee sustainability job. And as you can see at this point, that still hasn't really happened. And so I've just kind of gone with it and said, well, maybe this is the way it's supposed to. I am doing a lot of what I wanted to do all along, which is I know where the money goes. By being an importer, I know where the money goes. By being a small importer, I can have a lot of hands-on say in where the money goes and do my best to understand, whether that's having an impact and whether we need to change. Yeah. So I wouldn't say we do it perfect, but, that is why I'm doing what I'm doing today and how it's a little different than what I thought it was going to be when I first started that master's degree.
Based off of that, at what point did it start to transition into you working specifically with the women farmers?
Yes. Great question. It happened when I was in Rwanda, living in Rwanda, visiting the different cooperatives, and the one cooperative where I was giving some training. I have this training called Lean at Origin that I offer to producer groups at Origin. So I was at the cooperative giving this training, and some women and the manager of the cooperative said, well, on the break, we want to show you our women's plot of coffee trees. And I was like, oh, this sounds interesting.
Right.
So we walk outside the gate and over to this is the Copacabana Cooperative, and the Ajoheza president and one of her officers showed me their plot of about, I'm guessing maybe 100 or 200 trees. And what blew my mind is they were doing experiments. They had split the plot in half, and they were testing whether some new ideas for mulching and weeding would help save money for the women, for the farmers, compared to the kind of the standard best practices that the government was always proposing. And they were not just doing it for 1 year. They had already been doing this for like 3 years.
Oh, wow.
So they were seeing whether doing these weeding and mulching practices year after year, did it impact the quality of the coffee? Did it hurt the tree, or was the tree actually even healthier?
Mm-hmm.
And there was no NGO or, multinational company involved in this. This was just a cooperative that had a pretty smart agronomist trying to help the women make more money off their coffee. And I was like, wow, this is such a great story.
Mm-hmm.
If your coffee actually cups well, I'm sure there are roasters in North America who would love to buy this coffee. And that ended up being the case. I cupped their coffee. It was like an 86 plus.
Wow.
And so that is our Ajoheza coffee. That is still a kind of like a flagship brand for Artisan Coffee. A lot of companies have been buying Ajoheza for a lot of years.
Wow.
So I would say that was the thing that pushed me into buying women's coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were a number of things that kept me going in that direction. One being my background, understanding that when you pay women well, you get multiples on economic development. So like if you pay a woman $1 versus paying a man $1, you get like twice as much benefit by paying the dollar to the women. Wow. No offense to the men, sorry. and I'm using, very big, broad generalities here, but there are lots of papers written and research, very credible research, that investing in women, if your goal is to, raise all boats in a community, is a very wise investment, because on average, they will spend more of that money on the things that really lead to long-term development, like good nutrition, education for the children.
The priorities are different.
Yeah, exactly. So that was part of me. I was like, okay, so they've got women growing coffee. And then I asked, could I pay a premium that you would then make sure goes directly to the women?
Right.
And the cooperative said, yes, we'll do that. And I said, good. And by the way, I'm going to be very careful that you are paying it to the women. So don't be surprised when I tell you I want you to send me a bank receipt showing these number of either dollars or Rwandan franc were transferred to this specific bank account. And I made enough visits back, year after year to be able to talk to the women and make sure they had gotten the money. And so now it's become a pretty expected and understood practice that Artisan is going to require this 13 cents per pound of exported green coffee to get deposited in the women's account.
Wow, that's amazing though.
Yeah. And it's gone through different evolutions as to what the women do with it. Our only criteria as Artisan is that the women's group votes on how they will use it in a meeting where all the members of the group are there. Wow.
I love that. It's very diplomatic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope it removes some of the, like, what do I know about how they really need to spend that money? Right.
Yeah.
Do they want it? It's often they invested in their coffee, which is great. If that's what the women want to do, great. But I've also been a proponent of, why don't you just divide it up per kilogram and give every woman another, extra bunch of cash in her hand?
Right.
Because I trust she's going to spend that money very well in her household and in her community. So that's another element, is just, letting each group of women decide for themselves how that money gets spent.
I'm curious, when it comes to that, when they have meetings as a community, is it mostly older women, or are there younger children also involved that get a chance to see the influence of what you're creating? Because that's really influential. You're basically teaching a lot of community building and leadership skills.
Yeah. Well, I would say we're supporting it. It's like my story with Ajoheza shows, the cooperative already had the foresight to create a women's group and give the women land. So that shows a lot of leadership for the leaders of the cooperative. And we just come along and say, hey, that's great. We're going to give that a little turbo shot. Right. And it was kind of a turbo shot, I have to say, because the women's group grew from about 250 members to about 470 members today.
Oh, wow.
And I think a lot of that is because, word travels. Oh, you can get a little bit more money if you're in that group. You know, people find out about that. I would say it's not the leaders of the women's groups are usually not the oldest women and not the youngest women.
Okay.
They're often kind of the 30 something women. Like I've often been impressed, like the president of Ajoheza, when I first met her, I think she had one child and was pregnant. And then the next year she had two children. The next year she's pregnant again. They're in childbearing, family growing age while they're leading these farmer groups. It's quite impressive. And then, but there are a lot of elderly women in the group. And so some of this is going to be very specific to Rwanda.
Okay.
There was the genocide in 1994.
Yeah.
So a lot of the oldest women in the groups are widows. They are the women who lost so many of their family members, including their husbands. And very often these 60 years and older women, coffee is their only income.
Yeah.
They can no longer hold down a job. They're done trying to grow potatoes and beans. So like once a year they pick their coffee and they get some coffee income. And so they're really dependent on it.
Yeah.
And so one thing I've done is encourage the women to think about like one cooperative, they wanted to take all of Artisan's premium and turn it into a project fund where women could apply for money and get their project funded, which is, for the most part, that's great. But I said, if you're a 60-year-old woman and coffee is your only income, those projects, you are not interested in starting a new project to like start a tailoring business.
Yeah, it's a big investment.
Right. You just would, but you would love to get a little bit more money for your coffee charity. And so I asked them to consider putting at least some of their money aside for the vulnerable women in their groups.
Yeah.
Not necessarily age-based, because that would be discrimination.
Right.
But they know who are the ones who are really at risk.
Right.
And so I was really appreciative that they decided to do that. They had their general assembly and they agreed that, something like 10% of the premium was going to be set aside to help their vulnerable members.
Right.
And then the young ones, I have seen the premiums motivate younger women to to give their coffee a little more love and try to make this coffee into a thing.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories is of Betty, who again, she's a member of the Ajoheza group. Mm-hmm. When I first met her, I don't know if she was a member of Copacabana, but she was a worker. So I first met her as a staff person at the cooperative. Like, she was at the reception when farmers were bringing cherries. She was one of the people taking down the records. And then later on, I heard, a couple years later, I hear, oh, now Betty is a member and she'd love you to see her coffee trees. So then I went to the area where her coffee trees are, and they were great. They were like some of the most healthy, beautiful trees I'd ever seen. And turns out she had just bought a new plot, and she had like 400 trees, not just 100 or 200 like a lot of the other women. So she was investing in coffee. And then the next thing I hear, she's become an officer of Ajoheza. Now she's in charge of loan documentation for their lending group. So it's been fun to see some of those younger women who are seeing coffee become more and more professional and important in their lives.
It's such an intimate process. I feel like, especially over the span of years, you've watched and participated in the growth of these cooperatives. And I feel like that is such a gratifying thing to probably live through your life.
Yeah, it truly is. I really appreciate the opportunity, to feel a little bit like a mentor or a teacher. I still have so much gratitude for the people who mentored and taught me, especially the ones who agreed to take me along on their project to Rwanda back in 2015. I'm like, oh my gosh, I would love to do the same for others.
Right.
And I've found some ways to do that. Another way Artisan Coffee has found to do that is to host an internship every year.
Wow.
And so the internship is at Origin, and it's for right now we only have it in Rwanda, and so we hire a young Rwandan female graduate of college who's interested in the coffee industry but hasn't been able to find a job, which is something I kept seeing over and over once I lived there, right? I was like meeting these very talented 22, 23-year-olds who were finishing their degrees and then not finding work.
Right.
And I also saw very often, not that it's there is a strong cultural pressure to start your family at about 22, 23 years old. So you can imagine with that cultural pressure, it's very easy to get kind of pulled off track and just say, well, maybe coffee isn't the right thing for me. And I was like, I could use help as an importer. The industry needs these talented people in the industry.
Right.
Maybe with an internship, I can help at least a couple of these talented women with college degrees get into coffee. And then, 5-10 years from now, they're going to be the leaders here in Rwanda. So we are now on our third internship.
Wow, that's great.
So I'm very happy to share that our first intern is chief of production at Copacabana. So her name is Grace Isirwa. She's just phenomenal. I think she'll be the Minister of Agriculture someday.
Wow.
And it was really she helped me create this, right? She was my translator. We were driving hours and hours across Rwandan countryside. And I'm like, gosh, I really need someone who could help Artisan on the ground. And she's like, I really need a job. And I'm like, okay, there's a way we can make this work. So she was the guinea pig, and now she is fully employed by the cooperative. And then our second intern worked at a different cooperative, and she has also been hired not in a permanent position, but in a really important internship that's paid by the cooperative, not by me. So that's good. It's not an external group like mine paying her now. It is a cooperative,
Right.
but and it's an internship related to software. They are trying to get their heads around how can we, get more of our information into computers and into software and off of paper and books. So she's helping in that. That's her new job.
Oh, that's amazing.
And our current intern, she's in the middle of her internship. It's 2023, so she'll go January through December of this year, and she's at a third cooperative, so even a different one than the first two. Mm-hmm. And we'll see where she ends up going.
That's amazing. Wow. It's also amazing to know a lot more about Artisan and what it does.
Okay.
And because I feel like for the most part, importing companies have a synopsis of what they do and what they stand for, but never really fully divulge into like the semantics and all of the nuances and all of the people and building relationships and like obviously where the heart of that lies. So it's like this has been beautiful to listen to, and it's genuinely so nice to know where like it all came from.
Yeah.
It's also a part.
Thank you. Well,
no, go ahead.
I would just say it is beautiful to have this opportunity. Like, usually at a trade show or something, you don't have time to tell all these stories. So thank you to you and your listeners for listening to all these stories.
Yeah. No, it's also, it opens a door that I obviously haven't really had a chance to explore until now with interest of development like that. Mm-hmm. And it's like, wow, I would have never thought. You as a person never feel like you can actually benefit somebody else in a sense, but like
it's hard. Yeah.
It's like you're,
what can I do? Right?
Exactly. So it's like you're proving that you and obviously a team of many people involved, and the numbers that you said from like 200 to like 470, like that's an astronomical, like almost double and a half of what you started off with. So that's amazing with how far the development has been going. And to transition from that, I'm really interested then. Mm-hmm. You mostly do work with the women cooperatives. How has that chemistry with that worked in relation to a lot of coffee farmers that are owned by men and operated that way? Mm-hmm. Like, how is those relationships tied? And I know that obviously importing from Africa, there's a lot of legalities and things involved. Mm-hmm.
Well, so first at the cooperative and farmer level, I've been surprised with how supportive, at least in Rwanda, the men are. Maybe they're just supportive when they talk to me, but there seems to be a genuine understanding that women have faced unequal obstacles,
right? And
we can support them to overcome them in these various different ways. Mm-hmm. And thus, before I even came on the scene, a cooperative voted to A, create a women's group, and B, grant land to these women. And it's kind of the same understanding that we're seeing now happen with youth groups, right? Farmers have generally understood that the average age of farmers is getting very high. Mm-hmm. We need to do something to encourage youth. And so these same cooperatives are voting to create youth groups and voting to dedicate land for farmers 30 years and younger to do what, to learn the craft. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just kind of there. If I can kind of jump forward to a book I recently read called "I Am a Girl from Africa." She was a speaker at the IWCA breakfast at SCA Expo. So some people who were at SCA Expo might have been there and heard her speak. She helped create a United Nations campaign called He for She.
Mm-hmm.
So hashtag He for She.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that little phrase captures what I see in Rwanda quite a bit. There's a lot of men who just know that it's in their country's best interest, it's in their community's best interest to be supporting the women in their community. Does that make some sense? Does that answer your question?
No, that does make sense.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's really nice to hear, considering I would imagine not everybody's like that.
That's right. And it might be, it's, and I shouldn't, sugarcoat it and make it sound like there's no gender discrimination left in rural Rwanda, because that's certainly not the case either. The Rwanda in general has quite gender equity is pretty high on the scale of gender equity. They're probably ranked higher than the United States on some global United Nations scale.
Wow.
Because they have in their constitution that every legal entity, like their Congress, must be at least 1/3 women. And they've been far above 1/3 female for quite a long time.
Wow.
But that goes all the way down to like the local level. Every government group, that means our city councils level in the US, it would be comparable, is legislated that must be at least 1/3 female representatives. Can you imagine?
I wish I could imagine that. Actually, the fact that I can't is really sad.
Exactly.
Wow.
I mean, in some ways, it's things you can do when you're a small country, total population of 11 million, right?
Right.
But it shows where some of this general cultural support for gender is going to come from. But again, I still see quite a disparity myself when I'm in the city versus when I'm in the rural areas. And there is still a lot of like I have still yet to see a female running a depulping machine. I will be so happy to write a blog and come on lots of podcasts when I can finally get more females running the depulping machines. Like, there's still these real stereotypes of who can run machines versus who can, spend 8 hours a day sorting out the defects.
Right.
It's the women who can sort the defects, but it's the men who can run the machines. And which one gets paid more.
Yeah. That's, yeah. So at this point, where do you want to see Artisan go? Or do you have like personal development things that you like want to invest in and want to grow and start?
Interesting. Great question, Alina. Like I said, I would love to, I hope that Artisan is helping more and more women at origin get into the professional levels of coffee, right? So that, I feel fortunate. We work with a freight forwarding company whose CEO and founder is female.
Great.
And when I first found out about Prime International Carriers, I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. There's a woman who's taken this on and she's going to be in charge of a trucking company. This is awesome. And so I hope that there can be more opportunities where, whether we just contract with them as a supplier or whether through our internships, we start seeing more women in those non-traditional roles, whether it's trucking or exporting or running the depulping machine or being the manager of the cooperative. Fortunately, we are seeing quite a few more female agronomists. That's good. Which is another area where it hasn't been prevalent and I think will help a lot. female farmers are more likely to listen to a female agronomist. Just that's my guess. I don't know. And so that's one area. We also are passionate at Artisan about understanding cost of production, just because that is such a key crystal to having farmers be paid a proper amount. Like if the cooperative understands what is coffee cost of production, and then the farmer is more likely to understand that, and then they're more likely to ask for a price that covers their actual costs, and all of these things can snowball into better livelihoods and better margins for everyone involved. So we're very much on the bandwagon of many of the nonprofit groups, and there are a lot of different groups working on cost of production and understanding cost of production, and we love to support that whenever we can. So I think that might be two areas that we really feel like are our strengths in the sustainability. We support anything that's sustainability, and how is Artisan unique today and unique in the future? Maybe with this focus on cost of production and the focus on moving more women into the professional levels.
Yeah. So do you happen to have any stories during your journey? I mean, like you've gone through a lot during this journey where they've impacted you and stuck with you. I imagine there's probably a bunch that you could choose, but I'm curious that if it's like what moments or what circumstances have really impacted your journey, and how have they influenced a lot of your decision making and like obviously your viewer perspective of the industry?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, the story of Grace helping me start the internship is certainly one answer to that question. Like without her being as persistent about, like, I remember saying, wow, she's gone to all these great lengths. Like, even though she's just had a child, her second child, she's like made a point to meet with me, kind of turned her life upside down so that she could be my translator for 1 week. And she wants to do more. And she's telling me she would work for no salary if Artisan would just pay her expenses, because she wants to get into the coffee industry so bad.
That's all driven by passion and initiative and
Right. So it was her passion and me being able to see it so clearly by, I guess, traveling together for a week or so as business colleagues, that I was like, wow, there's something to this, right? I can't just ignore that she is that committed and that passionate. And so that would definitely be one example of that. And I would say I heard that and found that in the next two women that have become Artisans interns. One of them is Alice. She also had studied and was so passionate about how much she enjoyed, like, I think it was a school project or some very small project where she had been able to go out to the country and work with farmers, and she felt like she had been valuable, like helping them get some new knowledge or something. And she was like, that was just so amazing. I really want to do that. I want to do more of that. And Artisan's internship was a way for her to have a role out in those rural communities again, even though her family and the rest of her life were in Kigali, in the capital city. So it's kind of like, I think an analogy might be some kid in New York City saying, but no, I really want to work with the farmers in upstate New York.
Wow.
and someone believing them that that's really what they want to do, and giving them that shot to prove that, yep, they're willing to go up to upstate New York and work with farmers. Or maybe in your context, Alina, like someone from downtown Columbus saying, no, I really will go to, the border area with West Virginia.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think of other stories. In terms of talking to farmers, so I've talked to you about people who have professional roles. Farmers are really, really get you at your heartstrings too.
Yeah.
And I love the story of one Ejoheza farmer. Her name happens to be Grace also. It's a very common name in Rwanda. She has 11 children, and she's one of their biggest farmers with, so many trees. I think it's like maybe 2,000 trees now. Wow. And like a couple years back, she had just planted more trees. So she was so excited about the new young trees she had planted. And how the trees were going to help her, the coffee was going to help her, get a metal roof instead of a thatch roof on her house. And, 2 years before, she had been able to put in a cement floor. So they had a cement floor and not a dirt floor in their house. And when you hear these stories, you're like, wow, this is good. I'm glad coffee is having these impacts.
Right. Yeah, I feel like specifically also, like, people have an image of what farming and producing countries are like. And I mean, I also don't want to feed into the romanticization of what coffee does for producers. And like, we as people who live in America never really fully understand all of the complications that they have to go through. But it's still like, it's a humbling experience. I feel like it's important to be humbled by what we take for granted every day as a privilege. And then you see it in real other live values of people who genuinely will take the smallest things in life for absolute, just life altering things in their daily life. I guess, like, if there were people, considering you do so many different things for Artisan that I never actually thought of, I guess, like, and I'm actually very inspired by this story. It makes me very curious about development in countries, especially with coffee production. Like, I would have never thought of this as an avenue to get interested by. But now I'm like, wow, I want to learn so much about this. Like, I guess, like, I'm also asking this from personal interest. What would be somebody like myself, possibly, who would actually want to be very much interested in doing this in the future? Like, what would your advice be?
Right. Oh my gosh. Well, you will want to kind of put out there in the universe that somehow, someday, I want to go to Origin. Right. That learning by immersion is so super valuable. It's like, learning on steroids when you're overseas and can actually talk to people and see things that you can only do when you're there.
Right.
So hopefully some cool opportunities come. I know you've won a scholarship before, so I bet you could win another scholarship, Alina. And so getting to Origin is certainly one thing. And then start start finding your affinity group that is stateside located. Like I don't know, maybe there's some group at the university in Columbus that without being a student, you can you know, develop some relationships. I'm thinking of a sister city, like different times in my life, I've been involved in a sister city relationship, where it's just like my city had a relationship with a city in Nicaragua. And so we were learning about that. And we did some fundraising in my city to help fund a microcredit program in Nicaragua. So you might just see if there's some like things around your city that are connecting to places that happen to be coffee producing countries. Does any of that sound helpful?
No, it is. Yeah. I would have, I didn't even know sister cities was a thing. So yeah, I think that what you're saying is helpful for me too.
Maybe it exists. I don't know. And then in the coffee world, you know, there's some great organizations like today, if I can put in a plug, Grounds for Health. Grounds for Health is a wonderful nonprofit. They do cervical cancer screening for women in the coffee lands. And and tomorrow is their auction. So a bunch of importers, we're one of them, have donated green coffee. People can, like, the next 36 hours, bid on the coffees that are listed on the Grounds for Health auction. And since that coffee is donated, all that money that you pay for the coffee will go to Grounds for Health so they can do more cervical cancer screening in all the places where they do that. And so there are some groups like that, Grounds for Health, International Women Coffee Alliance, and Cafe Feminino are three that come to mind of, you know, coffee specific groups that are trying to do things at origin to benefit women.
Yeah.
And there's probably more, you know, that is one of the cool things about especially coffee, I think, is like Women in Coffee Project.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think I've connected you with them before.
I literally talked to Amaris on one of these episodes, and she's a beautiful spirit and loved everything. Like her story too was also like wild how she got to where she's got at this point when it came to that nonprofit. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Yes, no, Amaris is amazing, and those are the people that you, as someone who's interested, you'll just kind of have your eyes open, and when you meet them, you'll say, "Oh, this is someone I want to learn more from." But it sounds like you already have, so good for you. Yeah, I definitely especially at this point in my life, personally, just want to be surrounded by extremely inspirational people, and just who motivate me to what can I do to make a difference? What can I do to learn more and about knowledge? She was talking about how much she just has a hunger and curiosity for knowledge, and I'm just I love that, because I wish people were more curious, more eager to learn, and more there's a lot of anticipation and within wanting to learn about things, and I'm constantly looking for resources and people and building a community, and I just feel like every single time I talk to a lot of these women too, it's always okay, so a lot of the community that I want to be built with is in this industry. So it's nice to know that I keep finding remnants of you're in the right place at the right time and you're on your right journey. Are you still interested in growing the Arab American community of coffee, especially coffee roasters? I wish I got this question more often. Oh my God. That still exists. That is a huge, huge thing for me. It's really interesting because there's awesome. It's I don't obviously have much resource with sourcing people for this kind of thing, but it's always something I constantly keep an eye out on. I'm okay, can I find women who are Arab or Arab American and highlight them and get to meet them and build a relationship with them? So that's definitely something I genuinely want to like you were talking about finding a niche, finding affinity. I'm like, okay, so if there was anything that I could do, I feel like that would be exactly the kind of thing forefront that I'd want to focus on and try and do it on such an intimate and personal level by uplifting these women and hearing their stories, like what we're doing right now. But yeah, I absolutely would love to do that because it's like it incorporates like my heritage. It incorporates a lot of like certain things that are so particular with being first generation American, or like understanding so many facets of the Arabic culture and identity and all inclusion and different things that like I always was really interested in Yemen when it came to the coffee production part. Like I was like, if there's anything, and I had said that during the retreat, if there's anything that I've realized is that I don't know anything about what it's like over there. I obviously have no idea what it's like from the coffee production standpoint, but it's like I don't know anybody who knows anything about Yemen either. And it was like, okay, so this is really something I would.
Okay.
So it's like certain things where I'm like, oh, I would love the window to do it. And I remember meeting somebody during the retreat, and I was telling them this, and they were also Arab, and they were like, I don't advise you do that actually because it's not safe for women. And I'm like, okay, but that's even more incentive for me to try because for me, I'm like, I guess I don't get scared by challenge. Like I'm like, okay, well then that means that like if someone's not going to do it out of fear, no one's going to do it at all. And that shouldn't like stop somebody from trying to bring forth knowledge or enlighten the truth or the reality of the situation that they face over there. And it's like, I'm also not ignorant to danger and war and suffering in the Middle East in the first place. But
you're not going to be naive, but it's, I hear you saying it's not a reason not to try to do something in a safe way. Right.
Yeah. I think that if it's obviously something that isn't going to happen overnight, this is probably something that'll be the extent of my career within the coffee industry that I would love to nurture and grow and build. But it's like, I have to start with making relationships with people. Like I have to start with understanding where I can find the resources to do this. Like I can't just like not try. Especially because like coffee in the Arabic world is so ingrained in our culture. There's so much history about it. There's just like, and a lot of people, when I remember when I was talking to some of the people at the retreat, they're like, oh, I didn't know that about Yemeni coffee. And I was like, yeah, I know. There's so much stuff that we don't know about the coffee and like what's going on the forefront down there. And I didn't know any of this until I read The Port of Mocha, the book by Mokhtar. And I was just like, see, this is a person who went against the odds. His whole journey, he was like, yeah, I escaped death to do this. And then he's like, and I'm still continuing to do this. He's doing a lot of that development. And I'm like, see, that's so inspirational. We need more people doing this.
Let me ask this, Ilya. Do you speak fluent Arabic, right? Like that was your home language growing up? Or not?
So, since I did grow up in America, I don't speak much Arabic. I mean, I can.
Okay.
It's something that, like, I also grew up in Ohio. There's not that big of an Arabic community here. Right. And it's like, I'm also Iraqi, and there's not a lot of Iraqis in Ohio either. It does have an Arabic population, but it's more dense of like Palestinians and Jordanians and Lebanese people, and those are different dialects too. But I fluently understand Arabic.
So one reason I ask is, but you do understand
fluently. Yeah,
good. That's good because when I read books like The Monk of Mocha, is how powerful his language understanding and his ability to understand and speak the local language is a powerful piece of how he was able to do what he did. And maybe I'm just a little oversensitive to that because I don't speak Kinyarwanda, with the local language in Rwanda, and I keep trying. I have my like 5 sentences, but it's such a handicap, you know. relive how big a handicap the language is every time I'm there, and can imagine how having the local language is a huge benefit.
Yeah.
If you do have it.
I
guess
was
that's all. My only point.
Yeah, no, I feel like to piggyback off of that, it's also like, as somebody who, I know you're tight on time, so I won't drag this.
Okay.
But
Okay.
it's sort of like a self journey back to my people and my heritage. And obviously I'm not Yemeni. I'm not a Yemeni woman. However, it's like
Right. Okay.
the Arabic world and the Muslim world specifically is all like one unity. So it's like, for me, it's like, okay, if I was to really go forward with this, it's like I get to revisit myself, my people, my heritage, and I get to understand myself as a person and what an Arabic woman is like, and like live like it's just all interconnected in a way. And it's like that makes what I'm doing, my career, even deeper and more in tune with myself. And it's not just like a paycheck that I go home with. It's like what I'm doing actually matters to me. It matters to my legacy. It matters to my integrity and all these different things. And that's all I kind of want to like do.
Yeah. No, I think it's going to be interesting to see where you take this.
Yeah.
Just partly because I love your own passion for this area, but also because the specialty coffee world is really like loving Yemen, and everyone loves Ethiopian coffee, don't they? And well, that's it. But that, I don't know, Ethiopia probably isn't, even though it's right next door to Yemen, it's not considered part of the Arabic world, is it? Ethiopia considered part of
West Africa? West African Muslims too, like West Africa and the Middle East, have had a very interesting interconnected relationship with identity. Like Egypt.
Okay.
Egyptians, like, we would consider, I don't want to do a general thing over the internet, but like,
oh, we better not.
I was like, that's probably not a good idea. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I would consider Ethiopian people African people.
Sure.
Versus Middle Eastern people.
Gotcha. And so then let me say my next point, which was we see such growing interest in specialty coffee in places like the Emirates.
Wow. Yeah. I know Saudi Arabia is starting to invest in this as well. Yes.
So between the rise in interest in an origin like Yemen and the hype around specialty coffee, you look like you're dying of laughter there. Is this our cue to end this podcast?
It's really funny because people can't obviously see what just happened, but the whole mic just fell on the ground. I'm just dying. I'm so sorry. Oh no! I mean, like, I know you need to head out, so this might actually be like, hey, she needs to leave. How about you end the conversation?
Time to wrap this up. But very interesting. I think what I was getting to is, this sounds like to be continued in another chapter, please. Another day.
I would love to have you back on and we can discuss this more, because I feel like
awesome.
There's so much I can learn from you, honestly.
Oh, thank you. But likewise, we've only scratched the surface of what Alina is going to share.
Well, thank you for coming on here. I loved having you on here. I'm really glad I got a chance to know more about your brand and your business, and I got to know a lot about you and your story getting there. But I'm so excited to have you back and like talk more about different things. And I'm just like glad you were here.
Great. Well, thank you. Let's do it. And really appreciate the opportunity to share my story and be part of Beans
Without Boundaries.
Without boundaries. I was trying to think of the middle word. Beans without boundaries. Go, keep it up.
Thank you. Well, you have a great rest of your night.
All right. Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye. I love literally when the So mind you, this mic stand thing, it's exactly what you expect a podcast person to have, like the whole arch and everything. In the middle of the conversation, it just I try to adjust it and it just full on falls into my lap, and I'm like, oh god, I really hope this doesn't just disrupt her thought process. And now I'm like scared that if I move this, it's gonna fall off the table. Wow. So what did we learn today, class? This was a very good, informative other avenue, highlighting a different thing that's not usually like thought of when you think of the coffee production world, which is development. Sustainability development, I think, is another thing that she was focusing on too. And I just absolutely ate this up. I was like, wow. Like, I talk about how much I like wish I could make a difference doing what I do. And it's like, I also hate the white savior complex. Like the idea that it's like, oh, I have to go and fix a country. I'm like, no. She was basically reinforcing a lot of the things that like they as a community decided to take forefront doing. And I was like, oh shit, this is cool. And obviously, like, I understand nonprofit organizations and what they do for the communities that obviously they're targeting. But to go and do that and really nurture those relationships and try and just help reinforce stuff that's been built. I also didn't know much about Rwanda's gender equity, like it being so forward with trying to help women in roles. And I was like, well, that's beautiful to know. I honestly didn't expect that, but I didn't know what to expect. So I didn't have an expectation. But yeah, I think that I would genuinely love to have her back on the show. Majority of all of my people that I have talked to on these episodes would still love to have all of them back. But I think that because she's specifically doing certain things that I honestly am very interested in, and I've had we've shared many interesting stories together and not just on this episode. I just feel like it also would be able to help me with the niche that I had just mentioned before all that chaos of the mic, which is inclusion in the Arabic or the Arab American community within the coffee production world. And I feel like that's something that I genuinely want to build. Where it goes, who knows? But it's something that I genuinely just want to understand and get knowledge on and see what I can do within that, and hopefully build relationships in the community itself that reinforce what we do. And like I was telling her, like a lot of what I want to do as an adult now is just like be surrounded by extremely inspirational people. And it's like because I understand the Arabic world and the expectations and the cultural standards, like Rwanda has those as well, with women at a certain age are expected to have been married and start bearing children. And it's a lot of that same quality in a lot of Muslim conservative countries. But I see like the conversation where it started, and I was like, I would love to just blossom in this conversation about it too. So wherever that goes, it goes. But this episode overall is a great highlighting of what somebody who took a chance and a risk going to a different country and fully investing into something where it's a niche that no one would have thought of. Because I think decaf is something that people usually really stray away from. And then just like it spontaneously opening up another door towards something that's now her whole business. And I'm going to guess that she's going to continue to grow within that and build more relationships with women in Rwanda or wherever she decides to find interest in building those relationships with.